What's good, team? Welcome to another Small James coding tutorial where today we're going to be building a full stack application with SvelteKit and Firebase. We're going to be using Firebase for authentication and our database, and obviously SvelteKit for all the front end. The application itself is super cool. We can see how it works. We can register a user, test1@gmail.com. We can log them in. If we don't successfully log in, then we get error states and everything. Fully protected routes, so that's super cool. Here we can see that we've been logged into our dashboard. We've got some save, log out, and add functionalities. Currently we have nothing in our to-do list, but we can type watch this tutorial and learn SvelteKit. Can't spell for my life. We're going to add that. Now we can edit it, so we could edit it and say and like and sub. Add that back in. We can save that. That gets saved to our database. We can see we have the entry here. It keeps our email and our to-do. We could add another one, which is buy food. Add that, save it. Everything is completely persisted. We can refresh the page. We have a successful loading state. It's all still there. We can log out. We can test that it's protected by trying to come back to the dashboard, and we can see that we get rejected and we come to the login screen. And then once more, we can log in to our app, submit that, and our information is pulled and it's all still there for us. Obviously the delete functionalities work. It's an absolutely great project. Covers everything you could want to know about full stack development in SvelteKit and Firebase. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and sub, super appreciated. The support on the channel helps me make loads more videos, so that's super cool. And without further ado, let's get into the code. So to begin, we're going to start off inside of our terminal, and we are going to run npm create svelte at latest and then give our app a name. And so I'm just going to do SvelteKit full stack CRUD, just like that. Hit enter and it's going to come up with some options for us. For the template, we're going to want a skeleton project. For the type checking, we are going to say no to that. And we're going to go ESLint for code linting. So now that that's all done, we can cd into SvelteKit full stack CRUD, and we can open that up inside of a Visual Studio Code editor, just like we have here. And we can pull up a terminal down the bottom just here and run npm install to get all of our required packages installed. And while they're installing, we can talk about some of the files that we have. So the first one is Avit and Svelte config. They're not really important, but it's nice that our project is booted with Svelte. After that, we have the package.json, which is obviously for managing all of our dependencies and some of our scripts and stuff like that. Then we have the source, which is where all the magic is going to happen. So that will be our components, our routes, our context, stuff like that, our stores. And then we have a static file, which is for serving static assets like pictures or whatever that might be, maybe a font family. So now that that's all done, we can go ahead and run npm run dev inside of our terminal, and that will boot our project up on localhost 5137. So here she is in all her glory, and we can see that the code that we are looking at is from this page plus page.svelte. Now we'll kind of see how this works a bit later, but essentially that's basically your index.html file. And so we can see that this content inside of our plus page.svelte just matches exactly what we have on the screen. And this is kind of like our home route, our home page that we can, start from. The way the routing system works is basically like a file-based directory. So for example, we'll be needing a folder called dashboard. And if I wanted to render a component when people go to the /dashboard, we can just make that by having a plus page.svelte inside of there. While we're at it, we can create a new folder called components because we'll be needing some of them. One such component is going to be our authenticate.svelte. So you can see how that's slightly different. We actually give it a component name. And inside of our top level route, we're also going to add a new file called plus layout.svelte. Now the plus pages and the plus svelte are like special components or files, and essentially the layout has to return a slot component, and it's going to be used to just wrap our entire application. So we can come in here and render out the slot, and now you can see we're back to where we started, which is good. And all I'm going to do is wrap that inside of a div and give this div a class of main container. And then down below, I can go ahead and style that container inside of some style tags. I can go .main container. And we're going to give our main container a min height of 100% of the view height, a background of linear gradient to right, hashtag 000428, hashtag 000046. So that's going to give it a nice pretty dark color. We'll give it a color of white, a position of relative, a display of flex, and a flex direction of column, just like that. So that's looking groovy. We can see that we have some default styles sticking around. So if we come into the app.html, we can just use the asterisk selector to select everything and just default all of it. So that's going to be box sizing, border box, padding of 0, and a margin of 0. So that pulls everything to the outside, and now we've just got a cool looking background and, you know, some nice text color. So we can now close the app.html. We can also close our layout.svelte for the minute. However, later this is where we will have our modal showing up. We can also close our layout.svelte, and we can now render out our authenticate page just in here. So we can see that it gets imported inside of some script tags, and so the script tags where we will run our logic from. And now we can close that tag as if it were a regular HTML tag. And if we refresh our page, that is still there, and that's because I did this all inside the wrong component. We want to make sure it's the top level page component where we have our login, and we can see that the import is now incorrect, so we'll just do that once more. And now, happy days, we have our authenticate component. For our authenticate component, we're going to start off with a div, and we're just going to call this the auth container. And we're going to once again open up some style tags and target the auth container, and give this a display of flex, a flex direction of column, and an align items of center. And then inside of our auth container, we're going to have a form, and this is going to have an h1 tag that says login. And then after that, we'll have a label tag. Inside of that, we'll have an input with type equals email, placeholder equals email. We'll close that, and then we're going to duplicate this label and input 3 times over. So now we get our, the start of our login form. We're going to target the form in here and also give this a display of flex, a flex direction of column, and a gap of 8 pixels. And we're also just going to justify content in the center and give this auth container a flex of 1 so that occupies the full parent width. So now our login form is in the middle. We're also going to give this a width of 400 pixels. We're going to give this a max width of 100% of the parent element, and we're going to give it a margin of 0 and auto. And what that's going to do is it's going to center it in the middle of our page and just make sure that it never occupies more than 400 pixels or the maximum width of the page. Inside of that, we can target the inputs, and we can give them a width of 100% of the parent element. So then now they're nice and wide. And once again, that's still going to be responsive even though we set it to 400 pixels. It's never going to overflow the parent, and we can see that by adding a padding just here of say 24 pixels, and now our little page sits in from the borders and it's totally responsive. So now that we've done that, we can target the h1 tag. We can give this a text align of center that will center the login. So the next thing we're going to do is open up a new tab in Google, and we're going to come over to Google Fonts. And the font we're going to be using for this project is Poppins, so we can hit Poppins in there, select that, and now we can go ahead and add all of the regular, not italicized fonts. So we'll just get a bunch of them, semi-bold, just up to bold is pretty good. And now we can go ahead and copy this whole link tag right here, all 3 link tags, and we can come over to our app.html, and just underneath the style tag, we can paste that in right there. And we might also just grab the style tag and pop it beneath the link tags, and then in here just come in and target the HTML and give this a font family of Poppins and a backup of sans serif. So now if we come back into our app, those fonts have updated, which is super cool. And we can go ahead and style some of these inputs. So the first thing we're going to do is hit the form input and give this a border of none, a background of transparent. We can see that the color needs to be set to white. And we can also see that we get some horrible selection stuff. So we're just going to go form input focus and we're going to say border is also none. And I think it might be outline as well, outline none, just in case. So now when we select each of them, we get absolutely nothing. We'll also give them a padding of 8 pixels vertically and 14 pixels horizontally. So that will just spread them out a little bit. And we're going to also target the form and the label, and we're going to give the label a position of relative. We'll give this a border of 1 pixel solid blue. So now we have these little blue borders. I might actually change that to navy so it's a bit darker, a bit smoother. We'll give this a border radius of 5 pixels. So now they're rounded. We could actually just go ahead and make this padding consistent around all of them, so it's 14 pixels. I might spread them out a little bit more using the gap here, so I might change that to 14 as well. And obviously we have to come up to the inputs here and just change some stuff over, like the type for these two is going to be password. This placeholder holder is going to be password. This one is going to be email. And this one is going to be confirm password for when we register a user. At the end of the form, we are going to have a submit button. So that can be a button that just says submit. And we can give this a type of button, just like that. And we can come down here and style that. And we can just say button, or even better, form button. And we'll give that a background of navy. Well, actually, in this case, we'll go blue, a color of white, a border of none. As such, we'll give it a padding of maybe 10 pixels vertically, 0 horizontally, so it's a bit bigger. We'll stick with our theme of the border radius, so that's also going to be 5 pixels. We'll give it a cursor pointer, and I might actually change the background to navy, so it's a bit darker. And then we can have our form button hover state, and then the background can be blue. So now when we hover, that lights up. We can go ahead and come back into our app.html here and just give everything in here a transition duration of 200 milliseconds. And what that will do is slow all of our transition durations in our app, so it's just going to look a bit neater. So now we've got the start of a good login form. We will just make sure that we boost up that header size a little bit. So we'll say font size 3 rem, so that's a little bit bigger. And likewise for the form button, we'll just say font size 1.2 rem. So that is also a bit bigger. And I might just give it a bit more of a vertical padding of maybe 14 pixels and probably just bring that down so it's 1 rem. Now to handle these inputs, what we're going to need is a script. So in here, we're going to define a script. The first thing we're going to do is just say let email equal an empty string, let password equal an empty string, and let confirm pass equal an empty string. Now what we can do to make the input value match this is we can say bind, and we can set the value equal to the parameter or the variable. So it's insanely easy to configure this kind of stuff. This one is going to be password, and this one is going to be bind value equals confirm pass. So that's super simple. And the last thing we're going to do just to make our inputs look a whole lot cooler is we're going to have a paragraph up here, and this is going to have a conditional class. So we're going to need to use the curly parenthesis to evaluate this. And this is going to check if email exists. If it does, it's going to set a state of above, and otherwise it's going to set a state of center. Now we'll need to fill out that, so that's going to say email just in there. And then we're going to copy this whole thing, and we're going to, well, we're actually going to copy the whole line, and we're going to place that inside of every label just above the input. And we're going to update it so that it says the same thing as the placeholder. So this one will say password, and this one will check if confirm password exists, use the ternary operator, evaluate this as true. If true, evaluate this if false. And this one is just going to say confirm password. Now what we can do with these, we can see them show up just here, and that obviously looks pretty gross. But we're going to come down here and just target above and dot center. So we're going to hit both of them. We're going to give them position absolute, transform translate y minus 50%. We'll give it a pointer events of none so that you can't click on it, a color of white, a border radius of 4 pixels, a padding of 0 and 6 pixels, and finally a font size of 0.8 rem. So now we have these little elements here, and then we're going to target the above individually and give that a top of 0, a left of 24 pixels, a background of navy. I should probably make sure I spell that correctly. Background. We'll give it a border of 1 pixel solid blue and a font size of 0.7 rem, so a bit smaller. And then we're going to go ahead and target the center and give this a top of 50%, a left of 6 pixels, a border of 1 pixel solid transparent, and finally an opacity of 0. So you'll see what this does in 2 seconds. So right here you can see we have nothing. If we click on the element, we have nothing. But as soon as we add something and we lose the placeholder, we just get this neat little effect that's going to just make sure we know exactly what is above us. And then obviously if we get rid of it, it goes away. It's just a super cute little effect to add to your screens. After that, what we're going to do is inside of our script, we're going to define a function, and this is going to be handle authenticate. This is going to say if, and the first thing we're going to do is check if all of the values exist by just making sure that we have a guard clause. So we're going to say if not email or not password, then we want to return. And in here, we're also going to set error equal true. So we're going to have to define that state. We're going to say let error equal false to start. What we're also going to do is say or and check if register exists. And if register exists, that means that we're going to be on a registration page, in which case we will need to check if the confirm password does not exist. So if register exists and there's no confirmed password, then this will evaluate true and we'll set the error to true. So if the error happens to be true, then what we're going to do is have in here a paragraph. This is going to have a class of error, and that's just going to say the information you have entered is not correct, just like that. So there we can see it exists there, and that's because we don't have register yet. So we'll say let register equal false. And now we can conditionally render this tag by just saying $if. So this is how we add an if block to conditionally render something. We check if the condition is true. So if the error exists, and then we close the if block, and then we just have this inside of an if block. So that will go away for the minute, and while it's away, we can quickly just style it. So we can say .error and give that a color of coral and a font size of 0.9 rem. So what we'd probably also just want to do is quickly here evaluate this depending on the state of register. So we'll check if register exists. If it does, then this should actually say register. And if it doesn't, then it should say login. So currently it says login. Underneath this form just here, we're going to have a new div, and this is going to have a paragraph that says or, and then underneath or, we're going to have another paragraph that says something dependent on the state of register. So if register is true, then we want to give them the option to go back to the auth account, so to the login screen. So we'll say already have an account. And so then under this if block, we're going to have some more conditional logic. So we'll do an if. If register is true, then we'll have the else block, and then we'll finally close the if block together. So if register is true, then we're going to have a div, and this is just going to say already have an account, and I might actually just put that inside of a paragraph, just like that. That should be there. We have to select this one, move it to the front. Already have an account, don't need that closing one right there. And then after that, we'll have a little button, or even, I'm just going to do a second paragraph that says login. And then we're just going to copy this div right here and paste it in the other side of this if else block. And this one's going to say don't have an account, and then we're just going to say register. So we don't have any styling for this yet, so I'm going to give this a class of options. Come down to the bottom, we'll quickly style .options. So we'll give this a padding of maybe 14 pixels vertically and 0 horizontally. We're going to give .options, and then the direct descendant paragraph, a position of relative. And then we're going to go .options, direct descendant paragraph, and give it a pseudo class of after. We're going to do .options, lesser paragraph, pseudo class of before. We're going to give these both positions of absolute. They're going to be at top, 50% transform translate y minus 50%. We're going to give it a width of 100% of the parent element. We'll also have to make sure that the options itself has an overflow of hidden. We'll give it a height of maybe 1.5 pixels, a background of white. And now we can target each of them independently. So we can target the before one, well, I guess it's the after. We'll give this a right of 100%. And currently that's not showing up. So what we're going to do is remove this overflow so that we can make sure that it should show up. Here, we've got the position. We've got top equals 50%. Let's just try set it here, left of 0. Width of 100 pixels. That's meant to be 100%, but I just want it to show up. It's not showing up, so maybe we can take a look at that element. And since that's still not showing up, the one thing we're actually going to do in the meantime is just come up to the form input focus, and underneath we're going to go form label focus within. So if the focus is within, we're going to change the border color to blue. What this will do is just whenever we hover over a particular field, it will just change that background color so that looks nice. Now back to this element, what I'm going to do temporarily just to see if I can get it to actually show up on the screen is I'm going to just comment these out, comment all of that out, and just say inset 0. And I realized what my mistake is, so we can remove that, uncomment all of this, and obviously on pseudo effects, you just have to set the content as equal to nothing. So that was the mistake I was making. So let's just remove these comments just here, bring this back into action, get rid of that little comment field. And now we can see that we have this line showing up, so that's what we want. We can duplicate this field right here and we'll set the before. This one is going to have left is equal to 100%. And now all we have to do is set the text align to center, and that almost works. Let's just get rid of that left just there. And now that's getting pretty close. And then the last thing we want to do is just change this width back to 1% and set the paragraph to a width of fit content, and also give it a margin of 0 and auto. So that's going to bring it in here. And then these can have a width of 100 view width, and then we just need to uncomment this overflow hidden. We'll also just want to make sure that this has a width of 100% of the parent element so that it proper sticks out, and we'll also want to give it the same padding as the form, or better yet, just make sure that we actually set the same styles on the options container as we have up here. So both the form and the options container are going to contain this. So we can target the form and .options, and we can open that up, give them both the same width. And that didn't work because I'm just setting the width on options down there, so we'll have to unset that. And now we can see that it is all working as it should. It's nice and lined up, and that will expand and contract as required. And then the other thing we'll just do is set the padding on this element 0 and 8 pixels, and that's just going to push this stuff out here a little bit wider. And we'll also just come up to the .options and we'll set the font size to 0.9 rem. So that just brings it down a little bit, and now we have our nice little hover boxes, and our login form is looking amazing. We also just want to come to these sections, so it's going to be the div within options, and we want to give it a display of flex. So we will target .options, select the subsequent div, give this a display of flex. We'll align the items center, and we'll give it a gap of maybe 8 pixels. So that's going to place them like this, and then we'll target the options div paragraph last child, or even better, last of type. And we just want to give this a color of blue and a cursor of pointer because it's going to be used as a div. That's not quite right, so let's maybe say sky blue. Or we could even try, cyan. You can't quite see that on the screen, but if I bring that out there, you can see. So we have a little register button, and then when they click, it's going to change it to the other one. So honestly, all in all, that looks pretty good. And I might just come up into this div and just say justify content center, so that will push that into the center. And I think we're also going to come into options and give this a display of flex a flex direction of column, and a gap of maybe 4 pixels. So it's just going to push that down a little bit further. So now that that is working and we have a nice looking little form, we need to wire up this button. So the first thing we're going to do is hit the register, and we're going to define a function that's handle register, just like this. And this is going to set register is equal to not register. So it's going to inverse the Boolean state of register. Now we can assign that to this here. We can say on click, and we can pass in the function. And because it's a paragraph tag and it's not a button, we also have to just do an on key down and pass it an empty arrow function. So just like that. So now it's all happy. And then what we can do is we can change the state, although it looks like it's only changing it one way. And that's because I'm a Muppet and we have to add this to this login form, just this login button up just up here as well. So now if we refresh this page, we should be able to actively swap between a login and register screen. And we also want to make sure that this bottom label here only displays if the register is true. So we can add an if register just like that, and then we can close the if block, and we can just put this label inside of that if register. So now when we go to register, we get that extra form, and that is hunky dory. So we're going to finish up with the authentication page for a second, and we're going to come over to dashboard. So if I click here, we can see that currently we have nothing, and this is this page in here. So as I mentioned, we're at this route. It's like a file-based directory or routing directory. And so now hello shows up on that screen. We're going to start off by creating a div in here, and this is where we're going to have all of our magic happen. So inside of this div, we'll give this a class of main container. We can add a style tag down here and style.main container. And we can give this a display of flex, a flex direction of column. And let's just give it a background of green to see what we're working with. So currently it's nothing, and that's because we'll have to set a min height of 100% of the view height. So now the whole thing is green, hunky dory. We might also just give it a gap of maybe like 24 pixels. And at the top of our div here, we're going to have an h1. Well, actually even better, we're going to have a div, and this is going to say header container, like so. Inside of header container, we're going to have an h1 that says to-do list. And then at the end, we're going to have a button, and this is going to say save, and we'll come back and style these shortly. Anyway, here they are both here. We're also going to give this page a padding of 24 pixels, and then we'll target the header container and give this a display of flex, align items center, and a justify content space between. So it pushes things to either side. Now what we want to do in here inside of our main container is set the width to 100% of the parent element, set a max width of 1000 pixels and a margin of 0 in auto. And what that will do is ensure that our to-do list stays relatively centered in our page. And then after our header container, we'll define a main section, and we will give main a display flex direction column gap of 8 pixels, and this is where we'll have all of our to-dos. And in here we're also going to give this a flex of 1 because we're going to have a div down the bottom, and this is going to be called enter to do. Let's close that, and this is going to have a input with a type equals text, a placeholder equal to enter to do. We'll close that, and then after that we'll have a button that says add at the very end. So that should be pushed down the very bottom, and we can see that it is, so that's perfect. We can quickly style enter to do, and we'll give that a display of flex. We will align items stretch so that they occupy the same height, and then we can come in here and style the .enter to do input. We'll give that a background of transparent, so that is transparent. We'll give it an outline none. It looks like that's meant to be a border of none. Let's see if it still has that select state, so we'll go enter to do input focus. We'll say border of none. Okay, so this one's the outline, so we'll change that to outline. So now we just have an empty to do, so that is all good. We'll also give it a padding of maybe 14 pixels, a color of white, and most importantly, we're going to give it a flex of 1, and it's going to push that add button right down the other side. And then we can target.enter to do button, and we can give that a padding of 0 pixels vertically, but 8 pixels horizontally. We could possibly even make that 14. We can give that a background of, this one is going to be hashtag 003C5B. So it's a bit of a darker color. We'll give it a border of none, so there's no border. We'll set the text color to white. We could possibly even set it to cyan. We'll give it a font weight of 600, so it's a bit bolder. And then what we can do is just give this whole thing a border of 1 pixel solid cyan. So now we have this entire border here. And I think that we're going to change this border color to, instead of it being cyan, 0891B2. So it's just going to be a darker color down here. And now what we want to do is also just give this button a cursor of pointer, and we want to say enter to do button and add in a hover state. And that's just going to be background transparent. And so we can see the effect of that. If I just move that over, that's going to be our little hover state down there. So now that that is all good, the next thing we're going to do is just hit this save button. And so that is inside of our header container. So we'll keep all of this together, header container, .header container button. And we're going to give this a background. And for this color, we're just going to go ahead and copy the button color from down below. So we can just paste that in there. So now we have a button over here that's going to have the same color. We'll give it a color of white, a padding of 14 pixels and 18 pixels. That's maybe a little bit big. Maybe I'll make this 12 and 18, or even 10 and 18. We'll say border of none, border radius of 4 pixels, just so it's a bit rounded. Honestly, we might do that with the input down the bottom too. So that's going to be this enter to do. We'll give it a border radius of 5 pixels and an overflow of hidden. And for our little button up the top, we're going to give it a font weight of maybe 600 or 700. We're also going to give it a display of flex, a line item center, and a gap of 4 pixels. Now we need the gap because we're going to come over to Font Awesome Icons once again, and we're going to have a look at the icon setup for save, and we're going to copy this floppy disk outline here. We're going to copy that regular class, and we're just going to paste that in here before our save button. So we can put that in there, and we can wrap the save itself inside of a little p tag. So now if we come back and have a look, we can see that we have absolutely nothing, and that's because we have to import the Font Awesome CDN. So we can type Font Awesome 6.0 CDN. All these links will be in the description down below. And we can go ahead and copy this main link tag here and just paste this inside of the app.html, just underneath all of our font styles. So now if we come back to our app and reload that web page, we can see that we have that little icon there. So that's nice and neat. I might also just bump up the padding on this button. Sorry, the gap, I'll make that maybe 8 pixels so it's a bit wider, or even 10. And I'll also target the header container button icon and say font size 1.2 rem, so that will make it a little bit bigger. Maybe that's a bit big, 1.1 rem. Now we also want to give this .header container button some hover styles. So for that, we are going to give it an opacity of maybe 0.7. So now when we hover, we just get a bit of an opacity, and then finally we can set the cursor to pointer. So this is going to be our little responsive layout. Just here, nice and neat. We could possibly update the padding on our add button a little bit. I know you can't see it in the background just there. But if you come down to enter to do button, if we just make this 28 pixels, it's just going to push it out to be a little bit wider. It looks a bit better. And now we can go ahead and start making some logic. So we're going to come up to the top, open up a style block, and in here we're going to say let to-do list equal an empty array. And I'm a Muppet, that's actually meant to be a script block where we can run some JavaScript. So we have to-dos, And in here, I'm just going to enter a demo one. So do the groceries, just like that. And now what we can do is come into our main section, which is just here, and open that up. And we are going to use a map or render each. So this is going to be each to-do list. So every item in to-do list as a to-do, and we can also get an index from that. And in here, what we're going to do is just first target the index +1, put a period, and then we're going to have the to-do itself. So we can just render out the to-do, and we're going to wrap all of this inside of a div, and we're going to give that a class of to-do. So just there we have our little first to-do, pretty tidy. We want to be able to define a function to add a to-do, so we'll just say function add to-do, open that up, and we'll also need a value, so we'll say let char to-do equal to an empty string. And what we can do is we can bind the value of this input down here to that string very easily by just typing bind value equals current to-do. So now when we add the to-do, we can access current to-do and we can push it to the list. So we can say to-do list dot push the current to-do, and we can just make sure that there is a current to-do. So we can say if not current to-do, then we can just set, we can say error is equal to true. We'll also just want to reset the error every time we add a to-do, false, and we can manage that state here. So we'll define a variable error, we'll set it to true just so we can test it. And what we can do with error is we can define a conditional style. So on enter to do, we can turn that into a curly parenthesis and add on another style, and that's going to be error border, like that. And we can quickly style the border just down here. So we can say error border, and we can set the border color to coral, and we can add the important flag. So now we can see that if our to-do is incorrect, we get that coral border. And so we can set this default to false, so it's not there. Refresh that page. And that's not working because we have to make this a conditional statement. So what we'll do in here is we'll just say error is equal to true. We'll use the ternary operator. If it is true, the error state is true, then we'll render out border. Otherwise, we'll just append an empty string. So we can go ahead and trial this by adding this function to our button. So we can say on click and just assign add to do. And we can test it. So nothing is there. So we can just turn the border red. And then if I say lift weights, click add, that should get added to our state, but it didn't. And I think that's because of the way that we've defined this. So what I'm just going to do is instead of mutating the state, I'm going to copy it and add the current to-do. So I'm going to spread to-do list and add current to-do, just like that. So let's trial that. So we'll say lift weights. We click add and we can see that it gets added to the table. And then we obviously want to just set current to-do equal to an empty string, so that our input goes back to default. So lift weights, click add, and that gets added to our little to-do list. So that's pretty cool. What we'll also do is just come over to our to-do and target that class. So inside of main, we will hit the to-do, and we'll just give this a border left of 1 pixel solid cyan. So that's just going to give it a little border, and we'll also give it a padding of 4 pixels all around. I might make that 4 pixels and 8 pixels horizontally. Finally, what we're going to do is give this a display of flex. We're going to align the items in the center, and we're going to justify content space between, because we're going to have some delete and edit fields down the end there. And so in here, we're going to put this inside of a paragraph tag, and we're going to define a div, and this is going to be class actions. And so we can save that. And inside of actions, we're going to have 2 more icons. So the first icon is going to be a pen. And this one is going to be, for editing. So we'll say maybe this little outline one here. Copy that in. And then the second one is going to be a little trash can. So we'll just select this file one here and paste that underneath. So if we come back into our document, we can see these 2 little icons. We're going to want to spread them out a little bit. And we can do that by hitting this actions block just after our to-do. So we'll say .actions, we'll give that display of flex. Align items center, we'll give it a gap of 8 pixels. And after giving it a gap of 8 pixels, we'll just give it a font size of maybe 1.3 rem to boost up their font sizes a little bit. I might also just come back into this section here and just make the padding all around 8 pixels, or even 8 pixels and 14 pixels, just so it really pushes it in a little bit and probably match the gap to the size. So now that we have that, we have our little to-do list. The next thing we're going to do is make sure that the actions work. So we'll say .actions icon, target the icon, and we'll give it a hover state. And we're just going to set the color to coral on hover. So now when we hover, the icons turn coral. And we'll also do .actions icon and give it a cursor of pointer. So now when we hover over each of them, we get that little cursor pointer. And they're each going to have functions. So we'll define them just here. We'll say function edit to do. So this is some good CRUD stuff. And we'll define a second function, which is remove to do. And both of these are going to have to take an index of a to do item. For the edit to do, what we're going to do is just filter out that particular to do and set the input value to it so they can just update it down there. So that's pretty easy. So we're going to say let new to-do list equal to to-do list dot filter. We're going to take the value and the index, and we're going to say return I is not equal to index. So if the index of that we pass in of the one that we wanted to do is not equal to the index of the element in the to-do list, then that will return true and it will be added to the list. So that's going to be our new to-do list. After that, what we're going to do is say current to-do is equal to to-do list at the index. So that will set the input state down below. And then finally, we'll say current to-do is equal to new to-do list. So we should be able to assign this function to this first icon. So in here, we can say on click, curly parentheses, open up an arrow function, and we can just call edit to do and pass in that index. And once again, since it's an icon, we're going to just have to set the on key down is equal to an empty arrow function, just like that. So we can test this out. Currently, it's not doing a whole lot. Let's see if we inspect the page and check the console. If we get anything interesting, we click that, we get nothing. And I realize what the issue is. This is meant to be to-do list is equal to the new to-do list. So let's just try that once more. That totally works. We get the input down here and we can change it. So this would now be, and don't forget bananas. So we can add that back. We can edit it again. Nice. And that is our edit functionality all done. Our to-do functionality, after I just remove that console, is going to be very equivalent. We're just going to do the exact same thing, except we're not going to set the current to-do equal to the one that we remove. We're just going to filter it out. And obviously we can assign that just the same way. So we can copy this whole functionality here and just paste it as an attribute to this tag and change this to remove to-do. So if I refresh this page, I should be able to edit it. Nice. Add, delete, add a new one. Hello. That's there. And what we're also going to do is just have an if check. So we're going to say if to-do list.length equals 0, close the if check. We're going to have a paragraph in here, and this is just going to say, you have nothing to do, exclamation mark. So now I can delete that and we get this you have nothing to do sign, so that's cute. And then we can add one and say, do washing, add. So now we have all of our CRUD functionality just working. The next thing we have to do is actually persist this all inside of a state. And we're going to be doing that with Firebase. And that is also going to be for our authentication. The other thing we're going to do is quickly just add a login button. So I might just make a div here and wrap this button in there and then duplicate it and just have one that says log out. So now we have two buttons. I'll have to change this container. So I'll say class header buttons. and we can style that real quick. So dot header buttons will come down to the section just here, so it'll be this section. We can give that a display, a flex, align items of center, and a gap of maybe 14 pixels. So now we have our two buttons. We can save and we can log out. We'll quickly just want to get a log out icon just here. So I think I'm going to take this one and we can paste that instead of the other icon. So now we can see that we have a log out and a save in our to-do list. And that is when we can come over to Firebase. So this is going to be for all of our CRUD functionality. We're going to go to the console. You'll need to log in and create an account. In here, we're just going to create a new project that's SvelteKit full stack. We can click continue. We don't need any of these services. We'll go new. Google is going to provision us with our project or create our project for us. Then we can click continue. And for this project, we're going to need the Google authentication. So we can click on the authentication. We can get started with that. Once we're on this screen, we're going to want to select email and password. We will just enable that there. And that is all done for us. And then we're just going to come into a project overview once again, click on the Cloud Firestore, and once again create a database. Now for this, we're just going to start it off inside of test mode. You can update this later. And you can set the location to wherever you want, and this is going to provision us with the database for our project. And now we have a database provisioned, and then the last thing we're going to have to do is build this all into our application. And to do that, we're going to first come over to our application and create, well, we already have a get ignore, but we're also going to need to create a file with some environment variables. After that, inside of our source, we're going to create a new folder called lib/Firebase. And inside of here, we're going to create a new file called firebase.js. And we will see how that works in a second. And then we're just going to come back to project overview, and we're going to click on this web app thing just here. We're going to type SvelteKit full stack as an app name. We don't need any Firebase hosting. We'll register that app. And now we're going to have to add the Firebase SDK. So for this, we're going to copy this command just here, npm install Firebase, shut down our server and run that right there. And while we're doing that, we're going to look at this file. Now this file is very important. This is the information we're going to copy across to our firebase.javascript file. And these keys are very secret. So these keys are going to go in your environment variables folder. And so I'm just going to copy them one by one, come across to my environment variables, and we're going to label our keys vite underscore and then the name of the key and then the key, just like that. So I'm going to do that with all of them. So this one is the auth domain, vite underscore auth domain equal to that, vite underscore project ID, vite underscore storage bucket, vite underscore messaging sender ID, and finally the app ID. So it's going to be vite underscore app underscore ID. Now we have the environment variables set. We can read them into our thing. If I just get rid of all of these quotations, we can just go ahead and say in all of these slots, import.meta.env dot, and then the name of the key. So it's going to be vite underscore for all of them. And then we can just set them one at a time. So this one's API key. This one is auth domain. This one is project ID. Then we have storage bucket, messaging sender ID, and finally the app ID. So that will read in all of our keys, which is perfect. And now SvelteKit is a little bit funny in terms of how they initialize the Firebase. So we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to say let Firebase app initialize it, and we're going to say if.getApps. We're going to call that method that will need to be imported up the top, call it as a method, and then get the length. So what this does is that this checks if there's any apps and returns it as an array. If we currently have an app, that's bad. If we get 0, that's good, it's true. And if it is 0, that means there's no current app. So we can say Firebase app is equal to, And now we can call the initialize app and pass in the Firebase config. If there is currently an app, that means that SvelteKit has jumped the gun and initialized an empty app for us, so that's not going to work. So we're going to say Firebase app is equal to, and then call the get app, so singular, and just call that as a method. Then we're going to call the delete app method, so we'll need to import that up the top as well, and pass in the app, and then we're going to redefine it as equal to initialize app, and then pass in the Firebase config. So this is just going to make sure that our Firebase initialization is basically bulletproof. Finally, what we can do is say export const database is equal to get Firestore and pass in the Firebase app. And we can import that method from get Firestore from Firebase/Firestore, just like we have there. And then the last one is going to be export const auth, and that is going to be get auth. And we're just going to pass in, once again, the Firebase app for that one too. And that import is going to be get auth from Firebase/auth. And now we have configured our Firebase application, so that is neat and looking very tidy. What we can now do is actually go ahead and run some authentication. So if we come back to our home route, we'll have to restart our app. So we'll say npm run dev. And now that we're at our home route and our server has started, we are going to create a new folder in our top level directory just here. And it's going to be called store. And inside of store, we are going to have a new file called store.js. And this is going to be like a context state in SvelteKit. And basically it's just going to be a store where we're going to create a context of the user, so the Firebase user, and all of the Firebase information. And so to make a context or a store in SvelteKit, we have to import writable, just like that. And that is a lowercase w. And now what we're going to do is say export const auth store is equal to writable. And inside of writable, we can pass in a default state. And so that is just going to be user, and that's going to be null. We're going to have a loading state, and that's going to be true, because it's true until the user is loaded. And then we're going to have a third state, which is going to be data, and that is also just going to be, you could have it as an empty object. Underneath this auth store, what we're going to also do is define some auth handlers. So that is just going to be equal to an object. And in here, we're going to have a couple of methods. So we're going to need a sign up method. And these are all going to be asynchronous arrow functions. And inside of them, we're going to call Firebase methods. So the first one is we're going to await create user with email and password. So that will get imported from Firebase Auth. For this, we're going to have to accept an email and a pass as an argument. And then what we can do is we can pass an auth. So we're going to have to import auth from our lib Firebase folder as the first argument to this create user with email and password method. Then we'll pass in the email, we'll pass in the pass. So that's that one. The next one is going to be login. And once again, this is going to be asynchronous function. We will also receive the email and the pass as arguments. And in this one, it's just going to be await sign in with email and password. Have to make sure that we import that up the top. And we can once again pass in the auth and the email and the pass. The third one is going to be log out. This one is a little bit less complex because we don't need any argument. It's just an asynchronous function. And we just call async sign out with a capital, and we pass in the auth. So that's another method that we import. And these should just about do it for the minute. So we have them exported. And now what we're going to do is we're going to come into our routes and our layout.svelte, and we're going to add a script up the top, script tag. And inside here, we're going to, this is the component that we're going to use to authenticate our user. So the first thing we're going to do is import an on-mount. So an on-mount is on page load, and that's going to be from Svelte. And now what we can do is we can call onMount, we can pass in an arrow function, and at the top we're just going to console.log mounting so that we know that the page is mounting. And then after that we're going to say const unsubscribe is equal to auth. So auth like we imported from our other methods. So we're going to have to just import that in here. We'll say import auth, and we'll need the database from /lib/firebase/firebase.js, because these are the files where we export the auth in the database. We're going to say auth.onAuth state change, and this is going to be an asynchronous function that gets a user as an argument. And now this is the user that we're going to set to the store if it exists. So an onAuth state change listens to like login, logout, registration. And so if we register or log in, then the user will exist. And if we log out, the user will be null. So the first thing we're going to do in here is say const current path is equal to window.location.pathname. Now we're going to need to check the path name to make sure that we are using our unauthenticated routes correctly, or our authenticated routes. So obviously our login screen is an unauthenticated route and our dashboard is an authenticated or protected route. After that, what we're going to do is we're going to say if not user. So if the user is null, that means that we aren't logged in as any user, and non-auth routes dot includes current path. And this is going to be an inverse Boolean. So if, let's say up here we define our non-auth routes. So in this case, it's just going to be literally this route, but you might have more of them. So non-auth routes is equal to that. An example would be if you had a product page that was also non-authenticated, you could have that there. But we've just got the non-auth route, and then we can see if, so if non-auth routes basically does not include the path name and we're not included, then we're trying to access a protected route, which is bad. And so we're just going to say window.location.href is equal to home, and that is going to protect all of our paths. So in this case, we can see that working, because if I try now come to the dashboard, I'm not logged in, and so I get redirected home. We can still see that I get a snippet of the state in there, but we will fix that temporarily. After this, if we do happen to call any of this logic, we're just going to return out of the function as a bit of a guard clause so that it doesn't run any of the extra logic. And if we get this far, then we have authenticated, we do have a user, and we can go from there. And the other thing we're going to do is just say if we have a user, so if we are logged in, we are authenticated as someone, and our current path is equal to this home route, just like that, then we actually want to direct them straight to the dashboard. So we're just going to say window.location.href is equal to the dashboard. No point in them being in a login screen if they're already logged in. Just as before with any of these redirects, we're just going to return afterwards. So now we're basically on the appropriate page for whatever we're doing. We can actually fetch some user data. So we've established that the user exists. So what we can do is we can say const doc.ref. Now we'll have to import this in a second, is equal to doc. And doc is a Firebase database method. And we're going to pass in the database, and we're going to access a user's collection that we haven't defined yet. And we're going to target the user.uid. So the user ID is going to be the ID that we associate all of the user data with in that database. And this is a parameter that we can access from within user. And now we're going to say const doc snap. So we're going to take a snapshot of the doc is equal to, and we're going to await get doc, which is another method. And we're going to pass in the document reference. Now all of these can be imported from Firebase/Firestore. So that's where we can get those methods from. After we have the snapshot of the document, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check if it actually exists. So theoretically, there should be a document here. We're going to say if not, so if the doc snap dot exists, so if it doesn't exist, then we're actually going to initialize the user's document. So we're going to say const, we're going to define a user reference is equal to, once again, we're going to use the doc method. We're going to pass in the database. We're going to access the user parameter, and we're going to set the value of, the user collection, and we're going to target specifically the user with the UID. And now we're going to call an await method, and we're going to set the document. So this is another method that we'll just import up here. So we've established it doesn't exist, so now we have to set the document equal to whatever the information is going to be. So the first argument is we have to pass in the document that we're setting this information to, so that is that. And the second argument is going to be all of the information that we're actually going to set. And so it's pretty straightforward. In this case, it's just going to be the email, so we can keep track of the user.email so that we can kind of see who the ID belongs to by their email. And we're also going to keep a list of their to-dos. And that is just going to be an empty array. The final argument that we're just going to get into the practice of setting is merge equals true. That just means that if there does happen to be information there, we're just going to merge it all together instead of completely overriding it. But anyway, now we can come into the else block. So we've established that in this case, the document does exist. We want to access that information. So we're just going to say const data is equal to doc_snap, and we call the data method that will actually pull all of the data that we have saved. And I might actually just call this user data because we've set one of the parameters in our store to data, so that could just get confusing. And now what we can do up the very top here, and so, as before, we would expect this user data to contain this information just here as we've set it. And so before we run either of these blocks, we're just going to set something that says let data to set to store equal to, well, actually we can just define it like that. And now what we can do is in each case, we can say data to set to store is equal to this one just here in the case that we have nothing. And then we can actually just pass in that directly right there. And in the second case, we can say data to set to store is equal to user data. So now when we come out of this block, we can just assign this data directly to our store. In either case, we've initialized it or fetched it from Firebase, so that should be sweet. And so we can just say auth store, which will have to be imported. So we'll have to say import auth store from /store/store.js. So that's going to be our store that we exported just here, our auth store. And we're just going to call the update method. We're going to take in the current value of the store, and we're going to return a new state. And inside of here, we're going to set a couple of things. The first thing is we're going to set the user. So the user is obviously just going to be the user that we assign up here. The next thing is the data, and that's going to be data to set to store. And then the final thing is loading, and that is going to be set to false because we have successfully loaded our page. To be extra secure, we could actually just spread the current value to make sure that, if there's anything extra there, that we keep it. And now we can go ahead and save this page, refresh this, nothing happens, but this will all be running in the background. We can probably see that if we inspect and come into our console, we can see that we're getting a property of user ID. And we can so we can see that we mount successfully, but we're still getting this little error. And that's because we should actually just check one last state, and that's just if not user, then we just want to return outside of the function because, we're on the right page, but we're not going to have to do any of this Firebase stuff. So if I refresh that once more, we mount the page, everything is working hunky-dory. Now we can actually configure our logins. So we can do that by coming into the components themselves. So we'll come into authenticate just here, and we can see that we've semi-defined this function just here. So we can see that if we get past this first block, that we have the required information. And we can say if register or not register. So if register is false, then we are doing a login. So we can call the login method just here. We can say auth handlers. So we'll need to import that up the top. Auth handlers dot login, and we'll pass in the email and the password, just like that. We will want to make this an asynchronous function, and we will await the outcome of this function just there. And then we can have an else block that says await auth handlers dot sign up, and we can just do the same email and password. The one other thing we're going to do is put this stuff inside of a try and catch error block. So just here, If we get an error, we'll console.log there was an auth error, and we will just console.log error. I think it might be .message, but I'm not sure. So we'll just console.log the message, and we will put this if else block inside of the try block. And equally, if we do get an error, then we will also set error equal to true so that the user gets some visual feedback about that. And the other thing we can do is just set an authenticating state. So we'll say let authenticating equals false. And when we come in here, we'll just say authent is equal to true. And we can come down to where we have submit. So here's our button just here. And we can have some conditional syntax. We can just say if submit. So if we just do that again, we'll say if authenticating is true, so we're authenticating the user, then we'll show something, and otherwise we'll have an else block just here. So if we're not authenticating, then we show the submit, and then we can close this if. And in here, we're just going to come back over to Font Awesome Icons, and we're going to get a spinner. We'll just take the spinner right here, paste that in there. We'll make sure that we give this a class of submit button, because we'll just need to style that quickly. So if we come down to the bottom, we'll find the form button. We could actually just do it directly in here. We can say display is grid, place items in the center. That will place our spinner in the center, and then we just want to target the spinner itself. So here we'll say, we'll give this a class of spin. We can target that, come down here once more. We'll say spin, and we'll give it an animation. We'll call that spin. We'll give it maybe 2 seconds, infinite, so that it always happens. And then we can say at keyframes spin, and we can just say from transform rotate 0 degrees to transform rotate 360 degrees. So that should give us a full spin. Just to see what that looks like, we can actually set this to true. Come over to our page. We can see that that's not working in this moment. And we can see that that is not working because I can't spell infinite because I'm a Muppet. So now that's spinning when we show the authentication state. So we can come up and just set that to false. And now we can go ahead and give this a run. So we can add the authenticate message to this submit just here. And so we can just say on click is equal to handle authenticate. And then the other thing we just want to do in here is just say, we want to make sure that authenticating is not already true. So if authenticating, then we just want to return because we don't want the user to keep spamming the button. So we should be able to try that, submit. The information we have entered is not correct, so that's not going to work. And I just also want to move this authenticating down so it's beneath this error block to make sure that everything is working before we actually go ahead and start authenticating. If there's an error, we don't want to authenticate anybody. So let's go ahead and try that once. And the other thing we want to do is just center this error text. So we have class error. We will just find that dot error. It's right here. We're just going to say text align center. So if we just check this once more, now the text is centered, which looks way better. We are just going to register a user. I'll say hello@gmail.com 123456111. Then we should be able to click submit. The moment of truth, everything worked and we were authenticated. We got a error, project undefined has been suspended. This typically indicates that your device does not have. What we can actually do while we're here is just make sure that the logout works. So that's going to be inside of dashboard, just here. We can assign this to this button. We can say on click is equal to auth handlers. So we have to make sure that we import auth handlers. Is that, nope, that's the wrong one. Let's get rid of that. We will auth handlers, just like that. So now that's imported correctly at the top, and we'll call .logout. So that should work. Let's see if we log out. Okay, well, our logout page works perfectly. So now I should be able to register, or actually just log in with that same user. I'll make a new one. So we'll call it test@gmail.com. We can submit that. We get redirected, we mount the user, and we still get that same issue. And the reason for the error is actually simple. I made a spelling error. This key just here is misspelt in this one just there. So let's run this once more. Refresh the page. It created the user and everything works, and Bob is your uncle. So now if we look in the user, if we refresh this page, we can see that we have a user collection, and then we have the actual thing, and it works perfectly. We have the user as well, so that's awesome. We can go ahead and delete this collection now. Get rid of that. And so now that we have that done, the last few things that we have to do is just refactor a little bit of the code and make sure that our save functionality works. So we can achieve that if we come into our app. So the first thing we're going to do is, instead of accessing this information just up here, specifically the to-do list, we're going to define it as an empty array, and we're just going to say auth store.subscribe. We'll get the current value, open that up, and we'll say to-do list is equal to current.todos. That should set the to-dos, and that is actually a lie. It's going to be data. So let's just actually get data, and then we will access the to-dos within that. So that doesn't currently exist just yet. We'll have to make sure that in our user, if we come over here, well, actually what we're going to do is just set it to data. So that way at least it's happy. So the data is going to contain this field, so it looks like we can actually go ahead and access to-dos. So that should now be happy. So that's all happy. We're getting a 500 error, and that is from this side. It cannot read length. And the issue we're getting there is that occasionally it's going to come back as undefined. So we're also just going to add a loading state to this whole page just here. And we're going to say if $auth store, so that's going to allow us to subscribe to the auth store. So anytime auth store changes, this will listen for it. Dot loading, because we set this loading state, if you recall. If it's loading, then we're actually not going to return anything. We're just going to render a page. So we're actually going to inverse that, close that. So if the loading is false and we've fully loaded the page, then we are going to return this contents. So currently we're just getting undefined initially when user doesn't exist, and it's trying to render to-dos when it doesn't work. So now that we can see while we're loading the page, we get nothing and the page loads. So that looks way cleaner. Now we have nothing to do. And now what we can do is just configure the save. So we can define a new function that says function save to-dos, open that up. And in here, we're just going to call some pretty simple methods. And that's basically just going to be inside of a try catch block. Just like that, we'll have to make sure that we catch the error. We console.log, there was an error saving your information, just in case this goes wrong. And it's also going to have to be an asynchronous function. And inside of our try block, we're going to say const user ref, as we always have, is equal to doc. We need the doc method. And then we're going to pass in the database. We'll have to import that. I'm actually just going to go ahead and copy a lot of these methods just here, doc, set doc from Firebase Firestore into the dashboard page that we're working with. So just in here. And now I can pass in the users column, or user. I think that's what we set it as. Let's just take a look. If we go into the layout, when we set the user, we set the users. So that should technically be users, but we're just going with user. So that's all good. We'll stay consistent. And then the last thing is going to be authstore.user.uid. Keep in mind that we always use the $ to make sure that it's the current information. We're subscribed to that. And now what we can do is we can await setDoc, call that method, pass in the user ref, and we're just going to set data equal to the current to-do list. Well, it's actually going to be data to-dos is going to be to-do list, just like that. And then after this bracket in here, we're just going to set that last argument. So merge is true so that we don't overwrite the email that we've already saved. And that should actually do it for persisting our data. So we can now assign this to this save button. We can say on click, save to-dos. And honestly, we can go ahead and give this a shot. We can say, go get food, add that, save. We can check the network tab. That looked to have worked. And so if I refresh the page, we can, well, first we can actually look in the database. If we look at to-dos, that is just there, data to-dos. So that's actually my bad. That should just be like this. We can get rid of one layer of brackets, which is nice. So let's try that once more. If I save, go get food, and add that, and then we click save, check our database, we can see that to-dos actually gets updated. And so now I should be able to refresh my page, and we should actually get that information back, which we're not. And so we can confirm what is going on just here. So if we go to the console, we can see that we have recreated a user, it seems. Yeah, so we recreated the user, and that's once again because of this inconsistency just here. So let's just go ahead and make all of this users. So everywhere I have user, so we'll save it in there, and then we just need to add it to this one just here. So these are all users. This doesn't have anything in this one. When we access the user ref, we have to get to the users. So let's just try that once more. Refresh this page. We load, we've got nothing to do. Go buy food, add that, save our to-dos. We can go ahead and refresh the page. The information should come in, and that is now fully persisted. So that is absolutely phenomenal. We can log out, it's totally gone. We can type testing@gmail.com, 123456111, submit that. The information we entered is incorrect. I can't remember what the password is. Let's just check that. We can see that I entered an incorrect email, so let's try that once more. Refresh that. So that's a loading state we'll just have to change. So let's just go into authenticate quickly. And if we get an error while authenticating, then we want to set authenticating equal to false. So pop that in there. We'll try that once more. Test@gmail.com, 123456111. Submit that. We're redirected to our page, and we have our to-do list, and we can, do whatever we want. We can edit it. Very nice. Add and save that. And if we look in our database, inside of the new category, we can see that that is updated. And if I were to delete that and save that, it would now be empty, and it is. So that all works perfectly. So that is absolutely brilliant. That's our full stack application basically done. The last thing we're just going to do is refactor a tiny bit of this logic just to look at how we can do this, because it's not necessarily the best practice to have everything just in here. And so what I'm going to do is just create a to-do item. And so we're going to come into components just here and create one called to-do item.svelte. And we are just going to render out the to-do item instead of having this bit of logic inside of each block. So we're going to copy this whole to-do thing right here. This is going to go into our to-do item. And we are going to open up a script tag up the top, just there. And we're going to open up a style tag down the bottom. And we are going to import all of the props essentially that we need. So we're just going to say export let index, because we need the index. We'll say export let to do, and this is just how you can import things. We need these functions, so we can say export let edit to do, and we can say export let remove to do, just as we have here. So that's all good. We can come back into that dashboard. Well, actually, let's just see what styles we need. We need basically everything pertaining to the to-do. So we can just come in here, look for .to-do. We'll need the actions as well. So we will copy all of this and paste it inside of the style tag. And then finally what we can do, we won't be rendering anything at the minute, as we can just render out to-do item. So that will be imported at the top just there. And then we can pass in the props as we kind of expected. So we can pass in those functions. The first one is going to be the to-do equals to-do. Index is equal to the index. Remove to-do is equal to remove to-do. And edit to-do is equal to edit to-do. Close that tag. And we are right back where we started. We can see that those imports worked perfectly. And let's just try run this once more by food. We'll add that. We'll save this. We can check the database. We can buy the food. And we can refresh this page. And it's still there. Absolutely perfect. Anyway, that's pretty much the whole full stack application. We have a secure application. It uses the Firebase database. We've got, authentication, CRUD actions, and different pages and routing and everything, componentry in SvelteKit. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and sub. Super appreciate it. Helps me make heaps more videos like this and dedicate loads of time to it. Yeah, super appreciated. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.